and thank you for the incredible work you're doing in Texas. And let me thank the CWA and the other great unions who are standing up in these difficult times and fighting for working people against, as you have indicated, very, very powerful special interests. I also want to thank Congressman Beto O'Rourke for joining us today and all of the other great panelists for what I think is going to be a really, really interesting discussion in one of the great states of America. I don't have to tell anybody watching this that we are living in an unprecedented moment in American history. We got a pandemic that has taken 180,000 lives, and many thousands of those lives were taken unnecessarily because we have a president who has turned his back on science and medical knowledge in order to push his right-wing ideology. Today, as a result of the pandemic, we're living under the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression. That's true in Texas, it's true in Vermont, all over this country. And let's not forget for 1 second that millions and millions of people have lost their jobs. And because of our dysfunctional healthcare system, when you lose your job, you lose your healthcare. We're talking about people today who are having trouble feeding their kids, people by the millions worrying about being evicted. So when Donald Trump gets up there and he talks about how great the economy has been and is, we know what he really means. It is great for his billionaire friends. And we got to admit it. Hey, for all the billionaires who are watching this town meeting, I don't think there are too many of them, but if one or two of them are, you know, the economy is doing really, really great for you. But if you're a working person who's worried about getting evicted, who can't find a decent job, who's been working for starvation wages, who has no health care, who can't find affordable childcare, maybe sleeping out on the streets, you know that this economy has not been working for you. So what Claude said, and I think all of our panelists are going to say, is pretty simple stuff. And that is, we need an economy, we need a government that works for all of the people, the working people of this country. People can't make it on starvation wages. We can't continue being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all. We cannot continue the massive level of income and wealth inequality that we have today, where three people own more wealth than the bottom half of America. We can and must do better than that. And that is what this program is about today. That is what this campaign is about. It is mobilizing millions of people to stand up, to fight back, to defeat Donald Trump, to elect Joe Biden, and to understand that the day after Joe is elected president, we're going to be mobilizing people all across this country to make sure that he becomes the most progressive president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So there is a lot to talk about today. And it is my pleasure to introduce somebody who I've not seen since we were on the campaign trail.
Doing this and for inviting me and for coming to Texas, albeit virtually this time. And as soon as we get this pandemic under control in the Biden administration, we want to welcome you here in person again. You have so many people who love you so much. And I think this is testament to your leadership that you have brought all of us who are on this panel together, and you brought all these people in by the hundreds of thousands onto this live stream to understand what's at stake here in Texas and by extension, the United States. And I think you singularly have the ability to bring so many people out in the most important election of our lives, at least since 1864, in terms of deciding the future and the fate and the fortune of this country. And I've got to think, you know, in historical terms, when the history books are written about this year and this moment in American history, you are going to feature very prominently. Not only are you meeting head on the existential challenge that we have to our democracy and our republic in Donald Trump, but you're also facing squarely the long-standing fundamental structural challenges that might spell the end of the republic if we don't fix them while we still have a chance. And so you have been an inspiration to me and countless millions across this country. Again, grateful that you're doing this and that you've included me here today. One of the things that Senator Sanders has asked me to do is provide an overview of what's happening here in Texas. Well, Misty talked about and introduced a video that showed some of that. We're in the midst of this pandemic, as is much of the country. More than 12,000 of our fellow Texans have lost their lives, so many of them preventably, so many of them predictably, once we stopped following the science and the facts and the truth and the best public health guidance. But this pandemic has not affected all of us equally. It is absolutely decimating Latino communities, decimating African-American families and the families of Native Americans living here in the state of Texas. In the Rio Grande Valley, if you think about communities like McAllen and Brownsville and Starr County, they've run out of space in the morgues and the funeral homes, and they are stacking the dead bodies in refrigerated FEMA trailers right now. These are the communities, 95% Mexican-American, that are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. And it's not by accident, and it does not necessarily have to be our fate. When the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Texas, Republican Dan Patrick, says there are more important things than living, it begs the question, who is he asking to do the dying in Texas, in a state where the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour? And so many of those workers deemed essential are Black, are Mexican-American, are already struggling to make ends meet with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 jobs, and now have to struggle with their health care, maybe their lives, maybe the lives of their family members. This is what we're up against here in the state of Texas. Bernie also mentioned the economic dynamic of this, the worst recession since the Great Depression. In the first 2 months of this pandemic, twice as many Texans filed for unemployment as did in all of 2019. The lines at our food banks here in El Paso, Texas, stretch 2-3 miles long for people to pick up a box of groceries that they hope will last them through the week. The answer to this, as Claude Cummings spelled out at the top of the program, is making sure that we are mobilized, that we're activated, that we're engaged, that we're registering, that we're voting, and that we're making sure that everyone in our lives, our friends, our family, our classmates, our colleagues, our neighbors, the strangers with whom we engage on social media, are also registering to vote and also turning out in record numbers. Because here's what we can do. We saw a preview of this in 2018. Thanks to Claude and Julie Oliver and Antonio and Jose and so many of the great leaders that you're going to hear from today, we helped to produce the largest voter turnout in a midterm in Texas history. And though I did not defeat Ted Cruz, and Bernie, I am sorry about that, we still helped to make some good things happen in Texas. 2 new Democratic members of Congress replaced long-serving Republican incumbents. 12 new members of the state legislature, all Democrats replacing Republicans. And in Harris County, which has more people than the state of Colorado, 17 Black women were elected to judicial positions, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States of America. We have shown that it is possible right here in Texas when we organize, when we mobilize, and when we turn out. And here's what we could win in 2020 if we do that, if everyone on this call does everything that they can. We are only 9 seats down from winning a majority in the state legislature for the first time in 20 years. And in 9 of those seats that we have to pick up, I won more votes than Ted Cruz in 2018. Not only can we do this, in some ways you could say we have done this before. We have extraordinary candidates who are running across the board for these state legislative seats. So many of them women, so many of them women of color, so many of them Black women, first-time candidates who should be in those positions of power and public trust. We have an organization called Powered by People that is literally calling every registered Democratic voter in the state of Texas, in every one of these state legislative districts, to make sure that they turn out and these state legislative candidates have access to the correct phone number, the correct name, and the correct voter to make sure that they win these elections. And if we win that majority, then this state, which has the most suppressive, restrictive, and intimidating voter laws in the country, from the racial gerrymander that has existed as long as Republicans have had power, to the most onerous voter ID laws in the United States of America, to the fact that 750 polling locations have been closed in the state of Texas just in the last 8 years. And I don't have to tell you this, you can probably guess, most of those polling place closures were in the communities with the fastest growing Latino and Black populations in the state of Texas. And then this, y además, in the midst of this pandemic, the deadliest since 1918, for a virus which none of us has immunity for, our state leaders, all Republican white men, will not allow us to vote safely at a distance through the mail, with some very few exceptions, forcing us to vote in person, in some cases, to make the choice between our health, maybe our lives, and our ability to participate in our democracy. Well, this infrastructure of suppression and intimidation can be dismantled with a Democratic majority state legislature. And then this final point, all of this grassroots energy that Bernie was talking about, that Bernie has activated throughout the country, including here in Texas, can not only elect that Democratic majority state legislature, but that energy will flow up the ballot and potentially make Joe Biden the first Democratic nominee since 1976 to win the Electoral College votes of the state of Texas. That, I believe, more than anything else, will spell the end of Donald Trump and Trumpism in America, and will forever reorder the political landscape in this country and make the impossible possible. So that's what's riding right here in Texas with all the great people who are organizing, getting out there, voting, and everyone else beyond the borders of Texas who wants to help us by calling our fellow Texans to make sure that they get out to vote. You can do that with Powered by People, our organization. Now, I get to introduce one of the most exciting candidates across the board